Kia ora, it's Charlotte here for the New Zealand Quilt Show. Welcome to another episode, my first since being back from Symposium, the national quilt show here in New Zealand. My guest today is Brenda Gael Smith. She's an Australian quilter, although she was born in New Zealand, and she was our chief judge at the Symposium exhibition. She's also a teacher and writer and contemporary textile artist herself, and I'll do a full interview and intro in a second, but I just wanted to let you know to stay tuned for her synopsis of the quilt she saw at the Symposium exhibition and the Best of Show winner, which was Fly by Donna Ward. But I did want to mention a couple of things that we didn't get to in the interview. Brenda's travelling textile exhibition that she has curated called A Matter of Time, which has been travelling for the last 2 years, has its last showing in Houston at the International Quilt Festival in Texas from the 28th of October to the 5th of November 2017, and I know some of my listeners in the States will be heading that way. So if you get a chance, go along and have a look at that, because I saw it at Symposium and it was stunning. Brenda does an amazing job of curating works that work as a single piece, and they really draw you in. They're amazing works themselves, but the exhibition as a whole is an experience. It hangs together beautifully too. So she will also be doing gallery talks at 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. from the 2nd to the 5th of November, and she'll be doing one at 5:30 p.m. on Saturday the 4th of November. So get along and hear her talk about those works. She's also has a solo show coming up at the Gosford Regional Gallery in New South Wales, Australia, from January the 13th to February the 14th, 2018, and that will be showing her 52 weeks of abstract textile sketches that she has been doing, and work that has sort of emerged from doing that creative practice project, and that would be well worth heading to if you are in New South Wales at that time. So, as I said, I'm back from Symposium, and I've been back for probably coming up to 2 weeks now, and I haven't published a podcast episode, even though I've got lots of Symposium goodness to share, because I've been crazy busy getting ready for our local guild, Kiri Guild's quilt exhibition, which has just been held over the last 3 days, and we had a black and white challenge, or black and white plus one challenge, that I was helping organise. So I was running around getting that judged by the lovely Kerry of Toolis Textiles, and I'm happy to say that I won first in my category. I didn't expect to at all, but there you go. It was black and white. You could use, it was an A4 size quilt, any topic, and it had to use black, white, it could use black, white, any shade of grey, plus one other solid colour. So it was really neat to see those quilts. And then I was also finishing work for the King's Theatre Creative, which is my local art gallery in Kawakawa, which is closed over winter. And they do a few sort of programs in winter, but not much, because it's pretty cold, and then they try and open over summer for 7 days a week for all the holiday makers who come this way. I helped paint the floor. We've been doing a bit of renovation in there, and so that was a bit of fun. But I've been doing some work that has referenced my 100 Days project, which was, I did 100 days of paper cutting, and the tree branch shape emerged again and again in my work. So I wanted to explore that a little in fabric and sort of explore what it meant to me. And so there's work in the gallery that explores that sort of putting down roots theory. And if you'd like to see, if you won't get to the gallery to see that, because it'll be there for the next couple of weeks, you can head over to my Instagram feed, which is Mad Quilt Lady, and over the last couple of days I've been posting some of that work on that Instagram feed. And then there's Festival of Quilts coming up too. That's on the 4th, 5th and 6th of November. I've got 2 quilts hanging there, and I will be there. I'm not quite sure what day I'll be there yet, but I will be there, so please come and talk to me if you see me wandering around. I want to say a special thank you to all those people who did come and introduce themselves to me at Symposium. It was lovely to meet you all, and thank you for talking to me if you had work hanging in the exhibition and sharing your stories with me, and we'll hear, over the next few weeks, we'll hear from some of those people who had work hanging in the exhibition and who were brave enough to talk to me. I really do appreciate it. And so come and talk to me if you're at the Festival of Quilts and you've got work hanging too, because I'd love to share your story on the New Zealand podcast, New Zealand Quilt Show podcast. That'd be really cool. And it doesn't have to have won a prize or anything like that. It's just cool to get our stories out there as quilt makers. So stay tuned to hear Brenda Gael Smith, and stay tuned over the next few weeks to hear from vendors and tutors and people at the exhibitions from Symposium. I'll be sharing some of those interviews over the next few weeks too. Right, let's get stuck into our interview for the day, and I hope you have a quilty and creative day. So this morning my guest is Brenda Gael Smith. I'm actually getting to interview her in person, which is really fantastic because usually I do Skype interviews, but we're here at the New Zealand National Quilt Symposium in Christchurch. So Brenda Gael Smith is an award-winning artist who designs and creates contemporary textile art in her home studio in Copacabana in New South Wales, Australia. She was born in New Zealand, so we can kind of claim her like we do Pavlova. She made her first traditional quilt back in 1984, but it took until the turn of the century before Brenda returned to quilt making, which has since developed into a compelling and rewarding avocation. So Brenda is also an experienced curator, having curated and managed several themed textile art exhibitions that have travelled internationally to great acclaim. And Brenda also teaches and she judges, she writes and she exhibits her own work really widely. Today, as I said, we're meeting in person, and Brenda here is teaching, lecturing. She's accompanying her exhibition A Matter of Time, which is one of the travelling textile art exhibitions that she's curated that I mentioned earlier. And last, but definitely not least, is her role as a chief judge for the Symposium exhibition. So welcome, Brenda.
Thank you, Charlotte.
So to start with, can you tell us a little bit more about your creative path that's led you to where you are today? Because I think after that second quilt, which I believe was a little baby quilt for a friend, so how do you come to be from that to making abstract pieced art quilts?
Well, I need to go back to that very first quilt that I made when I was at university in the 1980s. And that was a really utilitarian quilt. It was made out of seersucker factory offcuts. They were triangles, which I then cut into strips and sewed together with no instruction. But with my mother in particular, she was is a very talented seamstress and engages in all kinds of stitchery and just very, very creative. And while I didn't sew myself, I learnt a great deal by osmosis. And so there was that first quilt, and then I had a little bit of a break while I was working, and then when I got back into sewing in the early 2000s, I took the opportunity to make lots and lots of baby quilts to hone my skills and to explore different techniques, explore different styles, and I just was like a sponge sucking it up from all different directions. And the beauty of working with small baby quilts is that they're very manageable projects. Now, I was working full-time as a lawyer. I had long hours, And so I didn't want to be sort of plunging myself into the king size applique extravaganza. It really suited me to work on small manageable projects, learn something from them. They were not masterpieces, but they could stay held together enough to be enjoyed. And it was also very rewarding to be making things that were functional, that were attractive and were enduring. Because I grew up in New Zealand, I did lots of knitting, but making woolly jumpers for babies in Australia
didn't work.
They wear them once, and then whereas a quilt has it's so much more versatile.
And you were giving these away?
I was giving these away.
So you get that reward of the satisfaction and enjoyment from the other person as well.
Precisely. And so while I was making all those baby quilts, in parallel with that process, I also looked around for ways that I could learn more in a more structured way. That was very scattergun. I taught myself. I'd see a magazine article, I'd see a book, or very early on I made up my own designs, but I was also aware that there was stuff that I needed to know to be better at this, and because I was working full time, it didn't work to sign up for classes, but I found the City and Guilds online course with Linda Kempshall, and that worked really, really well for me because it provided a structured framework, and it introduced me to concepts like the elements and principles of design. It introduced me, the very first module was all about colour and dyeing fabric, and that really reinforced that in addition to making these pretty functional things, that working with textiles can be art as well. And so the two processes reinforced one another. And then in the mid-2000s I retired from my legal career and immersed myself in volunteer work, but also into developing my own body of work. And that's I tend to have two strands to my body of work. There's my designs for magazines and projects which I recognise other people are going to be recreating that work, and then there's my own personal art practice.
I'd almost say that you've got three strands to your work, because we'll talk about this later too, but I see your curating and sort of that is a strand of work as well in a way, because I mean it's you've got your art practice, and this is deeply immersed in your art practice, but you're curating and you're writing and sort of almost on the professional side of promoting art, textiles as art, and writing books and things like that.
I agree that the process of curating other people's work informs my own work. It's funny how you can be objective about other people's work, or objective is not quite the word, but you're more distanced from it, and so you can perhaps see flaws or sort of gaps in the way that they've created their work, and then you come back and then you look at your own work with fresh eyes, and because you've had that experience of critically reviewing, then you sort of look at your own and go, oh, actually, I can see how that would be enhanced in a particular way.
Do you want to talk about what your current work is now, and your sort of your process of how you work? Because as you mentioned, with your City and Guilds, you learnt how to dye fabric, and whilst you make contemporary sort of pieced, bold work, you are dyeing your own fabric to get there, a lot of it. So can you talk about what is your work and how you get to the end product?
Yes. These days the focus on my work is abstract designs inspired by the natural world, and in particular my current focus is on my immediate environment at Copacabana in New South Wales, Australia. So it's a coastal environment, and I have a long-standing practice of taking a daily walk and or a swim. On my walk, I often will take my camera with me, and I've gotten to know my neighbourhood very intimately, and to take photos along the way. I take those back to my studio and review them, the photos, and I've taken to using, I'm not a great sketcher in my ordinary practice, but I've found that some drawing apps to use on my iPad, which help me isolate key shapes and key lines in the photos that I've taken. And my personal challenge is to see how much I can simplify the designs but still retain the essence of the subject, be it a particular bloom or a tree or a landscape oriented work, and having isolated those shapes and patterns. My current palette is very inspired by my surroundings. The sands at Copacabana are a golden orangey coloured sand. There's ocean out there that has ever-changing colours, and so I go into my great resource, they're my paints of all my fabrics, and pull it out. And having made the sketch, I don't necessarily refer to it closely. It's enough that I've sort of burnt that imagery into my memory. So I work with my own hand-dyed fabrics, and they tend to be semi-solids, but I like the hand of hand-dyed fabric and the small gradations. They're not super mottled and super marbled, but I like the body that those fabrics create.
And you see your own hand in your work then from beginning to end, really, don't you?
And by using semi-solids, you have very clean lines. And for me, I work freeform. I don't use rulers, I don't use templates, I don't use patterns. And by using a freehand rotary cutter, and those seam lines come into their own line of beauty. And I usually have a broad idea as to what I want the work to be in terms of size and the key elements of the design, but I also embrace the serendipity factor. So my studio is not large, but it has a 6 by 6 foot design wall in it, and for me it's vital to see the design evolve on the design wall, let it kind of vegetate there for a while and go away and come back and have another look at it.
Are you drawn to big works or small works? I know you've been doing a sort of a weekly series of small works, which we'll talk about later, but on a whole, what's your love?
The small works are really valuable learning tools, in the same way that my first baby quilts allowed me to explore techniques and styles. I find the small works have a really valuable role in my creative practice for me to explore design ideas, explore construction issues, and nut some of those engineering things out. But then I liked to put those into practice into larger works. I have made some substantial works that are greater than 2 metres wide, but I do find them difficult to manage and hogs on creative time. So I guess I'm most comfortable in the kind of 1.2 to 1.5 metre range, and it's fortuitous that that's also a size that is more suitable and economical for shipping and for travelling, and it's what I can fit on my design wall. It's what I can fit under my machine. So they all have a role in my overall practice. Those small works, and you learn from the large ones, and then you go, oh, it's so nice to be doing something small and manageable.
Yeah.
And
so talking about small works, and I wonder if this goes back to being able to nut out some problems too. I think I personally became aware of your work through the 12 by 12 project, which started about 10 years ago, and so that's working with 12 by 12 inch works. So can you tell us briefly about what that project was when it started and what it morphed into?
Well, the 12 by 12 project was the brainchild of Diane Perrin Hock in Healdsburg in California, and she had gone to a quilt show and seen a challenge where people had a common prompt and had made a small journal quilt. Journal quilts were the big things in the mid-2000s, and she thought, I'd really like to do that. And it was just at the beginning of blogging, and she thought, I don't have to do that with people in my immediate environment. There's this thing called the internet, and we can capture technology. And so she sent out a message to a dozen or so artists who she admired, some of whom she'd met, but most of whom she hadn't, and put forward this idea. And I was one of the people that she approached. And so it was a collaborative project. We each took turns to set the challenge, and we had 2 months to create the work, and we did a reveal online and shared that work, and it was incredibly exciting, and we could see a real energy, and that the project was better than the individual parts, that when we created these mosaics, that everybody had their position in it, and you could go from one challenge to the next and just see the work evolve. It was really exciting, and we wanted to exhibit, so we exhibited. But in addition to that, we were getting fantastic feedback from people who were following our group blog, and we decided to see if we could publish a book, and we put in a proposal to Lark Books, and it was goosebumpingly exciting when it was accepted. And so we did one round of challenges based on a theme word, we did another round based on a colour prompt, and then a final set of challenges that were once again reverting to a word prompt, and with a slightly different size. The year was 2012, and we made them 20 inches in length and 12 inches wide. And so that was a regular rhythm of challenges over a 5-year period, and not once did any member goof off. Everybody, they weren't all masterpieces, but every challenge was completed, and it was a tremendously satisfying project. It's also pre-Facebook, it's pre-Instagram, and I think it was really a product of its time. And we completed our last challenge in 2012, and we had the honour of exhibiting both the colour play works and the theme challenges at Houston, and that was an occasion for 9 members of the group to meet in person, and it's actually, so that's 5 years ago, and I'm still today get people coming up to me and saying, it was so inspiring, and we've formed our own group, and that is really, really heartening to hear.
It's amazing how many projects I think have been kicked off by watching what your group did. I mean, there's so many 12 by 12 challenges that I know of personally in New Zealand that have been kicked off from that. So imagine that right throughout the quilting world.
I was just at the Festival of Quilts in England and a similar kind of thing. And I think at the time, even when we were doing it, there were other groups that started, but we were marked by our consistency and our stamina. That we completed those five years with the same group of people, and we consistently delivered.
Yeah, there was a real professionalism behind your project, from having a group blog that was regularly updated and was professionally put forth. You know, it had a good professional streamlined look to it, plus exhibiting and the book as well, you know, really backed it all up as well. So it was awesome. And looking back on that work that you produced during that 12 by 12 project, so I can see relationships to the work that you make now, but there's also work there that I might not have picked as yours, you know, knowing your body of work now. So how have you honed your style over those sort of 10 years? And was it that regular creative practice that sort of helped you find what your kind of voice is?
Well, the thing about a creative project like that is that you have constant stimulation, and but you also have a benign peer group pressure of actually completing a particular work. So you had that prompt every 2 months, and it may be something that you would not have considered doing otherwise, or it may be forcing you to work in a palette that you wouldn't otherwise be drawn to, and that can be both distracting if you're wanting to concentrate on something, but it can also be a platform to advance you into
problem solve and things, yeah, a challenge.
Places that you wouldn't have otherwise gone to. And so what I found was that I often made more than one piece for a particular challenge because I wanted to try all these different things. But I, having completed that, I'd go, oh, well, now I've got that sorted, I would like to do that in a 1 metre by 1 metre work, or I'd like to expand on that idea. And there was a little bit of I don't quite have time to that because I've got to do the next one. So at the end of that 5 years, I was actually ready not to have that requirement to create a particular piece. I wanted to go back and look at some pieces that I'd really enjoyed making, and in fact I have several series that have their genesis in the 12 by 12 project. So I have my Desire Lines series, which was an exploration of positive and negative space with fine lines in them. I have my Dream Lines series, which was a lot more about shape, and I also one of the most influential is my Flying Colours series, which I had set a challenge, colour challenge, the Lorikeet palette, and
which for those people who don't know what a lorikeet is, do you want to tell us what that palette is?
Lorikeets are an Australian parrot, and they congregate outside my studio window in the banksia trees, and they are a particularly intense shade of green with highly saturated lime and red and orange yellow colour scheme, and they are really cheeky creatures and they have a lot of character, and it seemed like a really fun challenge to set. And I like rainbow colour, so why should I just choose one colour? I mean, I could have a whole rainbow.
You could put a bit of a spanner into the works, probably.
Well, I soon discovered that those intense colours were really, really difficult to work with, and my fellow 12s some of them weren't too thrilled about this particular challenge. But the work that I made, these were colour-based challenges, so that you weren't necessarily meant to, just because it was a lorikeet palette, you weren't necessarily going to make a lorikeet quilt. But in my case, I observed the lorikeets flying and all the colours under their wings, and so I made a linear work called Lorikeet Circus, and that was the start of my flying colour series, and I have a whole series of work that explores the colour and movement of Australian parrots. So that was very influential in my own creative practice.
Yeah. And that discipline of creating work every month or every 2 months, was it for so many years, it would have been fatiguing at times, but you all stepped up to that challenge and you all continued. And talking about that regular creative practice, you have just completed a year of creating weekly abstract compositions based on your surroundings at Copacabana. So talk to us about that.
Well, what happened was that, as I said, when I got to the end of the 12 by 12 challenges, I was really ready to take some of those small compositions and to explore creating them on a larger scale. And so for several years I did that, and then in 2016 I sort of thought, actually I quite miss having those regular challenges, and I kind of explored some of those ideas, not necessarily to their absolute conclusion, but I'd really gone down that path a long way. And I thought, gosh, I'd seen other artists doing the 100-day project, and that was just a step too intense for me with my other commitments. And I thought, what could I do? And I decided to do a weekly art project. And the thing about setting creative practice challenges is that you have to make them manageable for your circumstances. And it's good to have a stretch, but if you make them too much of a stretch, you don't meet whatever the timetable is that you've created. You lose all your creative momentum, and you feel like you've failed in whatever you've set up. So in my case, what I decided to do was a 6 by 6 inch textile sketch completed that was an abstraction of my surroundings at Copacabana, with a semi-restricted palette, but I wasn't too strict on that, and that I would put it online on a Wednesday each week, and that public accountability was really helpful to say to the world, this is what I'm doing, and come back and have a look at it.
Because you also asked people to join in if they wanted to.
If they wanted to, and when I invited people to join me, they didn't necessarily have to make 6 by 6 inch textile sketches. Early on, some people were doing cut-out paperwork. Some people did little pen sketches. Other people were taking a photograph. So it's making something that is manageable within your own personal dynamic. But the beauty of it is that suddenly, week after week after week, you put it all together, and it's really, really impressive. You go,
you've got a body of work.
I've done this. And then you can step back and go, I can see I had a bit of an off week there, but gosh, follow that one through, and because I did mine based on the seasons, or based on my surroundings at Copacabana, I also saw the seasons reflected in it, that certain trees coming into bloom. Go on my morning walk, and there's that gum tree in bloom, and then here I am 12 months later, there's that gum tree in bloom again. So it was picking up some of the rhythms of the environment as well. And So I really think it's a great way to kickstart. If you're in a bit of a creative slump, just turning up and doing something and doing it regularly, having that commitment to actually produce something, then amazing things can emerge from it. And I find myself, now that I've done that, I'm really, really excited about creating larger works and doing little textile sketches at 6 by 6 inches is really quite fiddly. And so I'm enjoying blowing those up and doing larger scale works. And in fact, I have a solo exhibition coming up in January 2018 at Gosford Regional Gallery, and I'm looking forward to sharing first of all 52 textile sketches from my weekly art project, but also a number of works that you can see will be based on those smallest textile sketches.
So just like your 12 by 12 project, it becomes a springboard for further creative series and things like that. So
I really commend the concept to people that are looking to launch their creative practice, that it's a really good framework to do it, and just making it something small and manageable allows you to nut out those kinds of things, be it construction issues or design issues, and then you can review it and pick out. Whenever you're working in series, you're looking at what worked in this, what didn't, what do I want to build on in the next one, and so every piece is
progression.
A progression.
Yeah, fantastic. So and you've had your little break now from that creative practice. Are you planning any further creative practice projects, or do you need that little? I haven't had
that much of a break. It was only in mid-September that I completed my annual cycle, and here I am. It's
just a little bit of a break.
It's early October, but seriously, my current attention is on sewing furiously. I have a very limited number of studio days between now and when my solo exhibition opens, so I'm really concentrating on that, but also completing the exhibition tour of A Matter of Time, and so I'll have a look at it again in 2018. It may take a slightly different form, but for now I'm really bursting with ideas, and they're ideas that I didn't have a year ago, and it all comes out of this project.
Yeah, and you almost need to give yourself some time to explore those ideas, because otherwise they just become in a sketchbook almost, but you haven't explored them fully, and yeah, you need to do that. So besides being a talented artist, talking about that Matter of Time that you're accompanying at the moment, you are quite an accomplished exhibition curator, and it's something I really admire. And you put out your first call for Beneath the Southern Sky back in 2011. So what was the impetus behind doing something like that? Because organising a themed travelling exhibition of other artists' work is an interesting step.
So my background is I was a corporate and commercial lawyer and a professional project manager, and I enjoy systems, and I enjoy processes, and so when I retired from my legal career, I stepped onto the committee of my state guild, and I became exhibition secretary. So since the mid-2000s I've been active in exhibition administration, and I love my volunteer work. I'm on various exhibition committees, and I believe they play a really vital role in providing a venue for members to share their work. But there are necessary constraints with working with committees and consultative processes. And also I was actively involved as part of the 12 by 12 group in having our international exhibition tour. But once again, we were a body of 12 people, we were highly consultative, there was no individual leader that we all deferred to, and so we had we had a lot of job sharing. But as part of all of that process, I was really keen to learn how to jury work, to learn how to select work, and I also had ideas about how a touring exhibition might be most effectively organised, and I wanted to really put those ideas into practice. And
sometimes it's nice to be in charge and do it your way.
There was a very strong element of that I had these ideas that I wanted to try out. I wanted to try out online entry forms. I wanted to try out different entry fee models. For example, with my travelling exhibitions, I wanted to maximise participation, so I didn't charge any entry fee to submit a work, and it was only if your work is selected that the artist paid a kind of contribution fee to help offset some of the administration expenses. So that was the background of doing it. And so when I did it with Beneath the Southern Sky, there were lots of things that I learnt that I wasn't aware were going to be issues, but it was a rewarding process, and I've gone on to do it two more times.
You've taken those lessons and done it again, and you've organised Living Colour, which I was part of, I just have to say. And then the current exhibition in Christchurch, which is A Matter of Time. And all three of these, they've travelled extensively international, and they've been really well received. I saw Matter of Time the other day, and there's something about having a cohesive, themed exhibition that really makes you enjoy the whole as well as the parts. And why do you think they've been so successful?
Well, first of all, I think I put a lot of thought into the themes of the exhibitions.
Yeah. How did you choose the themes?
That's part of the reason why I don't have any current plans to do another travelling exhibition that format, because I've had three such great themes. The Beneath the Southern Sky was all about a sense of place, and the entrants didn't necessarily have to live in the Southern Hemisphere, but they needed to reference that in some way. Living Colour was all about colour, and
it was hugely popular with entries because of that.
And then A Matter of Time took a more philosophical turn, and I was absolutely delighted at the interpretation. So I think part of the appeal and why they're so engaging is that the themes are relatable. I also think that the format of the works, being 1 metre by 40 centimetres, is a really nice size. When you're standing in front of those works, they're human scale, so they fit your form. You're not having to crane your neck to look at the top or at the bottom. You can just take in the whole work. So I think, and because most of the exhibition spaces that they're shown in are not huge exhibition spaces, there's an intimacy that comes being able to scan all of the works side by side. So I think that's another element of the appeal. There's the amazing quality of the work, and part of my drive has been to showcase as many different techniques and materials to demonstrate how versatile the medium is. And so that gives people something different to look at all the time. And then finally, I think it's the fact that it is 30 in the case of Beneath the Southern Sky, or 32 artists in living colour and A Matter of Time. You've got 32 different people's work. So even if one person's style doesn't appeal to you, there is something that you will respond to. And so as a curator, I wanted to have works that were accessible to people that weren't necessarily familiar with textiles. And in the gallery setting, we're talking about men, we're talking about children in the galleries, and it's so, for example, with living colour, just watching children respond to the fish and the flowers and the dragonflies. I think I remember a dragonfly there. Just was really, and having the audience engage with the work. Catherine MacDonald's work has featured in both Beneath the Southern Sky and A Matter of Time, with its messaging about wartime experiences. And so if men had been dragged to the galleries by their quilt-loving wives, they can enjoy. They've often found those works accessible. So that, I think that's been a large part of the appeal. And so it has been really successful, and I want anything else that I do to be as successful. So for now I'm pausing on a high note.
Yeah, I could imagine. It could be a little bit intimidating. The more success you have, you want to continue producing success and enjoyment for people. So yeah, it can be a tough act to follow yourself in a way. So you're also here in Christchurch as your role as chief judge, and I know people are going to want to hear about that. So what made you? Well, yeah, let's talk about what made you decide to be a quilt judge, and how did you go about it? Because that's an interesting path as well.
Okay, I was exhibition secretary of Quilt New South Wales, and in 2007, so we're talking about 10 years ago now, I got a scholarship to attend a judging training course here in New Zealand that was organised, I think, maybe by the predecessors of Aotearoa quilters.
Yes,
I'm not sure. It's a bit hazy, and I did that because I wanted to report back to my guild as to whether the kind of judging procedures that we had in place with our show were on a par with best practice, or whether there were areas of improvement. So I did that judging training course, and then looked for opportunities to actually judge. But I've been involved with lots of exhibition administration, and currently I'm actually the convener of the judging education program for Quilt New South Wales. And what I would say is that anybody can be a quilt judge, and I'd encourage everybody to, informally or otherwise, to develop their evaluation skills. So it's all about viewing as much work as you can, and I'm not just talking about quilts, I'm talking about across all media. Avail yourselves of opportunities to go and look at work perhaps that you don't understand, that is a bit obtuse, but contemplate, why does this work or why doesn't this work? Why am I drawn to this work? And there's a framework that you can do that in terms of evaluating design. And so just rather than having a knee-jerk reaction, or I really like that colour, or something like that, to develop the vocabulary for assessing what it is that you're looking at. And so that's just been an ongoing process of my own professional development and learning. And to get an assignment like Quilt Symposium, it was very, very exciting. But it's the first time that I've actually personally done jurying and judging in a blind process, because although I've curated my own exhibitions, they're not blind. I know whose entry it's come in, and I've just worked on my own. So to be part of a team doing it blind has been a new experience for me, and really challenging, and
it's a huge responsibility.
It is, because there were 350 entries or thereabouts, and in our jurying team there were two others, Marianne Hargraves and Philip Truston, but I was the only one with a quilting background, and I wanted to have all the entrants have confidence in the process, and hopefully we've delivered that in terms of outcomes.
So, you said you were involved in the jurying and the judging, so the jurying process narrowed down those 350 works to about 170, I think.
Something like that.
That would actually be exhibited. So you got to see all those entries to start with, and what can you tell us about, what were your impressions of the overall sort of standard and style of work that was submitted, and could you see any particular trends? Was there anything completely unexpected? And then, how did you go from there?
Okay, I would say that when you're jurying from digital images, that the focus is more on design and visual impact. It's unless there's something glaringly obvious, it's hard to assess something from a technical execution perspective on an image. So you're also handicapped or enhanced by the quality of the images submitted, and some of the entrants let down their work by submitting things that showed their work crooked or in a poor light, or had the edges cut off, or those kinds of things. But in terms of trends, something that I noticed were quite a large number of hexagon quilts in different styles. They weren't all English paper pieced, and many of those made it through the jurying process. So you have this wonderful catalogue that has been produced from Symposium, and if you just look through, I think there's about 10 quilts that made it through that have hexagons of some description in there. There are also a number of cross quilts, and
yes, actually, when I think about what I've viewed of the exhibition so far,
there was not as much hand stitching as I expected there might be, and Marianne, one of the jurors, that's her specialty focus, and she also remarked that she thought maybe there might be some kind of Tawhai kind of work,
Pacifica sort of
elements, and that didn't come through. So those were the kinds of things that we observed in the jurying stage, but it wasn't until we actually saw the quilts in the cloth that the execution and the workmanship asserted itself in more detail.
So then let's jump to the Best in Show winner. Fly by Donna Ward from Hamilton. What made this work stand out from the crowd of all those quilts that you had juried?
Okay, to understand the process, we had a day of reviewing the actual quilts, and there were some categories already. So the cultural connection category, there were it was the first prize in that category, so that would get put to one side. There were the creative construction category, first prize gets put to one side. Then in the open category, there were a number of prizes to be allocated that had certain attributes. So, for example, there was a best pieced quilt. So we were presented with works that were pieced, and we we chose the best piece of quilt and so on. So there were, at the end of the day, we had the first prize winners of all of those awards and categories. And we were very fortunate that the facilities enabled us to put all of those up on walls. And so we could actually step back and go, gosh, here we are at the end of the day, and this is what we've got to choose from to select the best of show. And there were works that asserted themselves. They were strong within their category, but they didn't necessarily hold their own against the other pieces there. But what drew us to Fly by Donna Ward, I think, Philip Trustham talks about resonance, and that's that really deep reverberating quality. And if you look at Donna's work, the rhythm and the repetition of the triangle shapes and the New York Beauty spiky shapes, and the whole piece absolutely glows. And she's used contemporary fabrics and that grayscale behind the colours. The whole work really, really glows, and it's not perfectly symmetrical. It's got enough variation in it that your eyes carry it around, and you can come back and see different things each time. So it was unanimous. So we each come from different backgrounds, but there was a high degree of consensus about what just worked, and so that's it. So it was very, very satisfying. But in addition to Donna's work, then there was also the other two runners up to the best of show, and it was really nice to have that variety between a pieced work and the exquisite applique with the New Zealand wildflowers, and then the Sky Danced is a very striking work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It is nice to have. I think that's one comment that people have said, that the exhibition had a real variety in it, and that the prize winners had a real variety in them too. So that was exciting for people to connect with different works and see, whatever resonated with them.
That was part of the brief that we had from the symposium committee, was to present to the extent that we could draw upon. We were restricted by what was actually submitted, but within what was presented, to really showcase that diversity.
Yeah. So in other parts of the judging process, thoughts about other particular quilts. You said it was unanimous for Fly by Donna, but working with two other judges, you must have butted heads at some point. How did you resolve differences?
Well, we had some robust discussions at the jurying stage.
Robust discussion.
And there was, if two of us were in favour of a work, then at the jurying stage it would get through. It didn't need to be unanimous for everybody to get through. And it was quite interesting because at various times, various ones of us would advocate for a particular quilt. Well, I think this one should stay in because of X, Y, and Z, and we were a polite lot, and we usually deferred to one another. And then when the work actually arrived, it was a revelation to see some things. And there was some work that presented beautifully on the small screen, and when it turned up, you think, oh, that wasn't quite what I was expecting, and vice versa. That other work arrived, and oh gosh, didn't realise it was quite like that. Oh, and there's a whole dimensionality and texture and that comes by seeing the work in the cloth. So, and it was quite funny that I just remember one work that one of the other judges had advocated for quite strongly, that I was a little bit ambivalent about, and then when it turned up and we were at the judging and we were selecting the works for the touring exhibition, so there's 20 works that are going to be travelling around the country with Aotearoa quilters, and the judge that had advocated for that work then said, I don't know that needs to go into the tour. And I said, oh no, that looks fabulous. You've got to have that one. And so we did a bit of shuffling. And that was actually really nice to have that opportunity to do another kind of jurying process to work out what was going to go on that tour.
Having them in the cloth is so different from seeing them on screen. And in fact, I have been, where was it? I can't remember quite where I saw it, but someone was advocating for a jurying process where the jurors did not interact with the other jurors. They saw works completely by themselves and completely so there was no chance of influence by other jurors.
Okay, well, what we did was that we each independently reviewed the images in our own time before we met in person. Right. So we had an opportunity to go through, and so then when we got together, an image would come up on screen, and we basically would be saying.
You'd already formed your opinion.
We'd already thought about it, and it was an interesting process that just over and over and over again we had formed the same view about the work that was appearing on screen. So,
we are coming up to about an hour's worth of talking. Isn't it amazing? So I'd just like to ask you just a couple of lighter questions to finish it off. We could talk for hours about this judging process. I know I could anyway. So, first of all, where can listeners find out more about you or reach out to you?
I have 2 websites. One is my teaching website, serendipitypatchwork.com.au, and then one is my personal website, brendagaelsmith.com. In both cases, there's a sign up for my newsletter, which I send out on a quarterly basis, and so you can find me there. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram.
Is on Instagram you're Brenda Gael Smith, and on Facebook we'll find you Serendipity Patchwork Quilting.
That's correct.
That's cool. And what is the first thing to go in your suitcase when you're packing for a teaching trip?
It's my teaching samples, because although I teach more technique-based classes, so you don't come to my classes to make a particular project per se, there is nothing quite like seeing what the techniques are manifest in cloth. And so there may or may not be room for toothbrushes and pyjamas,
but your teaching samples go in there.
That's the first thing in the suitcase, and I really like to take as many samples as I possibly can.
Have you ever had your luggage lost?
No.
Fingers crossed.
Don't mention such things.
No, that'd be horrifying, wouldn't it? Okay, when you open your fabric cupboard, which colour has got the largest pile?
Well, currently I have an embarrassing excess surplus of blues. I was wanting to make a work that was inspired by the ocean, and so I thought I would try all those blues. I'd mix my own blues. I'd get blues that were pre-mixed Procyon dyes, and I'm thinking that I really still have way too many, so I can see some over-dyeing with yellow so that I can make my favourite colour, which is green.
There we go. Your favourite colour is green. That might have been a question I was coming up to. Now we know. And what's your favourite or your must-have tool or technique or something in your studio that you absolutely couldn't do without?
You know, when I retired as a lawyer, my going away present was an early digital camera, and that flows through with my practice today, and I find it just an invaluable tool, from inspiration collection with images, from recording my design process and construction process, to presenting my work for catalogues online, for exhibitions. I can't imagine my creative practice without a camera.
Awesome. That's really cool, actually, because that hasn't come up before in my other questions from other artists. And yeah, it's important in my practice too. Where would we be without our digital cameras? So thank you very much, Brenda. I appreciate your time. Symposium is crazy busy, and you've squeezed me into your schedule, so I really appreciate it. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlotte.
You've been listening to the New Zealand Quilt Show. I'm your host, Charlotte Scott. Please visit my blog, theslightlymadquiltlady.blogspot.com, for show notes for this episode and any more information you might need. Email me, theslightlymadquiltlady@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you, so please don't be shy. And the music for this podcast is Crunk Night by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.